On June 19, 2011, a Swedish underwater exploration team called Ocean X was conducting routine sonar scanning operations in the northern Baltic Sea between Sweden and Finland. The team, led by professional deep-sea salvage experts Peter Lindberg and Dennis Åsberg, was searching for shipwrecks. They were particularly hoping to find bottles of vintage champagne from 19th century vessels that sank in the region, valuable finds that could fetch high prices from collectors. Their sonar equipment swept the seafloor methodically, painting pictures of the underwater landscape in grayscale images that veteran divers like Lindberg and Åsberg could read as easily as maps. They had seen thousands of hours of sonar returns showing rocks, sand, mud, and the occasional wreck. They knew what natural seafloor formations looked like. They knew what shipwrecks looked like. And on that June afternoon, they saw something that looked like neither. The sonar image showed a massive disc-shaped object resting on the seafloor approximately 90 meters below the surface. The object measured roughly 60 meters in diameter, far larger than any shipwreck they had encountered in the area. But size was not what made them stare at the screen in confused silence. It was the shape. The object was almost perfectly circular, with edges that appeared sharp and defined rather than eroded or irregular. And extending behind it, stretching for nearly 300 meters across the sea floor, was what looked like a trench or furrow carved into the sediment, as if something massive had crashed or slid across the bottom before coming to rest in its current position. Lindberg and Åsberg looked at each other with the same unspoken question. What could create a sonar return like that? Natural rock formations do not appear as perfect circles. Glacial erratics, large boulders deposited by retreating ice sheets that are common in the Baltic, do not leave long straight trenches behind them. Shipwrecks do not maintain geometric precision or create impact paths hundreds of meters long. The image looked artificial, engineered, deliberately shaped. But what could possibly be sitting at the bottom of the Baltic Sea that would create such a sonar signature? They marked the coordinates, saved the sonar data, and made a decision that would consume the next several years of their lives and create one of the most controversial underwater discoveries of the 21st century. They would return with better equipment, with funding, with divers and remotely operated vehicles and scientific instruments, and they would find out exactly what was sitting at the bottom of the sea, creating that impossible sonar image. They expected to solve the mystery quickly. They had no idea they were about to discover something that would challenge everything. Mainstream science believed about the history of human civilization and what might be hidden beneath the world's oceans. This is the story of the Baltic Sea anomaly, the discovery that should not exist, the evidence that experts cannot explain, and the terrifying possibility that what lies at the bottom of the Baltic Sea is not a natural formation, not a shipwreck, but the remains of something technological, something ancient, and something that suggests human history is far stranger and more incomplete than we have been allowed to believe. When Ocean X returned to the site with proper funding and equipment for a comprehensive investigation, they brought professional divers, underwater photographers, ROV operators, and scientific consultants. The plan was straightforward. Dive to the object, photograph it extensively, collect samples, and determine what it was. They expected to spend a few days, solve the mystery, and move on to more profitable salvage operations. Instead, they encountered problems that made the investigation far more difficult and far more mysterious than anyone had anticipated. The first problem was the location itself. The object sits at a depth of approximately 90 meters, which is at the extreme limit of recreational diving and requires technical diving equipment, mixed gases, and careful decompression procedures. The water temperature at that depth in the Baltic Sea is near freezing year-round. Visibility is often poor due to sediment, algae blooms, and the low light penetration at depth. These conditions made photography difficult and limited bottom time for divers to short periods before they had to begin the long ascent with mandatory decompression stops. But the environmental challenges were expected. What was not expected was the electronics failure that occurred when the dive team approached the object. As the support vessel positioned itself directly over the sonar coordinates and divers prepared to descend, crew members noticed that their satellite phone lost its signal. GPS navigation became unreliable, showing position errors and drift. Some electrical equipment on the vessel began malfunctioning, requiring resets to restore functionality. At first, the crew attributed this to equipment problems or atmospheric interference, but as the pattern repeated across multiple dives and multiple pieces of equipment, they realized the malfunctions were linked to proximity to the object below. Divers reported that their dive computers that monitor depth, time, and decompression requirements sometimes froze or displayed error messages when they were directly above or near the object. Underwater cameras experienced battery drain far faster than normal. Some electronic equipment simply shut down and would not restart until the vessel moved several hundred meters away from the site. The team estimated that a roughly 200-meter radius around the object seemed to interfere with electronics and satellite communications, creating what some researchers have called a dead zone of electromagnetic interference. This interference became one of the most controversial aspects of the Baltic Sea anomaly investigation because it suggested the object might be generating or somehow affecting electromagnetic fields. Natural rock formations do not typically interfere with electronics unless they contain significant concentrations of magnetic minerals. But even strong magnetic rocks would not affect satellite communications or cause GPS errors. The interference pattern suggested something more unusual, something that mainstream geology could not easily explain. When divers finally reached the object and began visual inspection, what they saw did not resolve the mystery. It deepened it. The object appeared to be made of dark, almost black stone or heavily oxidized metal, difficult to distinguish in the low visibility and darkness at depth. But the geometry was unmistakable. The surface showed features that looked artificial, straight edges, right angles, and what appeared to be carved or shaped sections, creating patterns that seemed deliberate rather than the result of natural erosion or geological processes. The divers described finding what looked like walls, not rough rock faces, but smooth vertical or near vertical surfaces with defined edges. They found corners where surfaces met at precise angles. Most disturbing, they found what appeared to be corridors or channels cut into the object, creating passages that extended into the structure in ways that natural rock formations do not typically produce. And in one section, they found a circular opening approximately 25 centimeters in diameter, set within what appeared to be a square frame, as if someone had deliberately cut a circular hole and surrounded it with a squared border. This circular hole in a square frame became one of the most hotly debated features of the Baltic Sea anomaly. Geologists argue that natural processes can create circular holes through dissolution, erosion around harder inclusions, or volcanic activity. But the Baltic region has no volcanic activity. The bedrock in the area consists primarily of ancient Precambrian shield rock, granite, and sedimentary deposits, none of which typically form circular cavities with geometric borders. And the square frame surrounding the circular hole is even harder to explain through natural processes, because erosion does not create clean right angles and squared borders around circular openings. The dive team collected samples of the material, carefully using tools to chip or scrape pieces from the object's surface. The material was extremely hard, requiring significant effort to break off even small pieces. Some samples appeared to be basaltic rock, similar to volcanic formations, but with unusual characteristics. Other samples looked like heavily oxidized metal or mineral deposits with properties that did not match known Baltic Sea geology. The samples were sent to multiple laboratories for analysis. The results were contradictory and confusing, which only added to the controversy. Some labs identified the material as basalt, a volcanic rock formed from rapidly cooled lava. The problem is that there are no volcanic formations in the Baltic Sea. The region has not had volcanic activity for hundreds of millions of years, and the geological record does not show evidence of underwater volcanism in the area where the object sits. Other analysis showed that the material had been exposed to extreme heat, far higher temperatures than would occur naturally in the Baltic seafloor environment. The rock showed characteristics of rapid cooling after exposure to temperatures exceeding 1,000 degrees Celsius, similar to what would occur if molten rock or metal was suddenly cooled by water. Some samples showed crystalline structures consistent with material that had been subjected to intense heat and pressure, then cooled rapidly in a way that does not match any known natural process in the Baltic region. Taken together, the lab results suggested something that seemed impossible. The object appeared to be made of material that had been exposed to extreme heat, possibly to the point of melting or near melting, then rapidly cooled while submerged in water. This could explain the basaltic characteristics of some samples, but it does not explain how such temperatures and rapid cooling could occur naturally in an environment with no volcanic activity and no known mechanism for generating the necessary heat. The 300-meter trench behind the object became central to theories about what the anomaly actually is. The trench appears on sonar as a long, relatively straight furrow carved into the seafloor sediment, extending from the northwest and ending at the object's current position. The furrow is several meters wide and shows displaced sediment pushed up on either side, exactly what you would expect if a large, heavy object had slid or been dragged across the bottom. Geological processes can create trenches and furrows on the seafloor. Natural causes include icebergs scraping the bottom, underwater landslides, and sediment flows, all of which can leave marks. But the Baltic Sea Anomaly Trench does not match these patterns. It is too straight and too consistent. Icebergs create irregular gouges that wander as the ice rotates and shifts with currents. Landslides create chaotic debris fields. The Anomaly Trench looks like an impact or crash path, as if something came in at an angle, struck the seafloor, and slid to a stop, displacing sediment in a pattern consistent with a single massive object moving in one direction before coming to rest. This observation led to the most controversial theory about the Baltic Sea anomaly, that it might be a crashed craft of some kind, either an ancient human-made vehicle, a natural phenomenon we do not understand, or in the most speculative interpretations, something of non-human origin. The theory proposes that the object was once technological, possibly metallic or ceramic, and that it experienced catastrophic destruction involving extreme heat that melted or fused its structure. Over thousands or even millions of years submerged in the Baltic Sea, the destroyed craft became encrusted with mineral deposits, oxidized completely, or through some process transformed into the rock-like substance that divers now encounter. This theory explains several anomalies that natural geology struggles with. It explains the geometric features because the object was originally artificially constructed and retains some of that geometry despite catastrophic damage and long-term degradation. It explains the extreme heat signatures in the samples because the object was destroyed by fire, explosion, or some energy release that generated temperatures high enough to melt its structure. It explains the trench because the object crashed or was forced down into the water, impacted the seafloor, and slid before stopping. And it explains the electromagnetic interference if the object contains materials or structures that still interact with electromagnetic fields even in their degraded state. The problems with this theory are obvious. If the object is artificial, who built it and when? If it is ancient human technology, why do we not have any historical records of civilizations capable of building vehicles that could travel over or underwater, and that were large enough to create a 60-meter debris field? If it predates known human civilization, that requires rewriting history to include lost advanced cultures that conventional archaeology does not acknowledge. And if it is non-human in origin, that requires accepting that Earth has been visited by extraterrestrial or unknown intelligence, a conclusion that mainstream science rejects without extraordinary proof. Skeptics and mainstream scientists have proposed conventional explanations for the Baltic Sea anomaly. The most common explanation is that it is a glacial deposit, specifically a large section of rock that was scraped from bedrock by advancing glaciers during ice ages, transported by the ice, and deposited on the seafloor when the glaciers retreated. The trench could be explained as the result of the rock settling into soft sediment or being dragged by moving ice before being deposited. But this explanation has problems. Glacial erratics are common in the Baltic, but they are typically irregular in shape, showing the fractures and rough surfaces that come from being broken from bedrock and transported. The Baltic Sea anomaly shows geometric features and defined edges, features that are not consistent with glacial transport. Glacial deposits also do not typically show evidence of exposure to extreme heat or rapid cooling, and glacial rocks do not create electromagnetic interference patterns. One explanation suggests the object could be a World War II anti-submarine defense installation, for example, a sea mine or defensive structure deployed by Germany or Sweden. The Baltic Sea saw extensive naval activity during World War II, and defensive structures were indeed deployed across the region. But wartime records do not show any installation at the anomaly's coordinates. Wartime structures were made from steel and concrete, which corrode and degrade in predictable ways that do not match the material properties of the samples retrieved from the anomaly. Wartime structures also fail to explain the 300-meter trench, the extreme heat signatures in the samples, or the geometric surfaces that appear integral to the object's structure rather than added human construction. The most disturbing possibility is not that the Baltic Sea anomaly is unique, it is that it may be one of many. The world's oceans cover over 70% of Earth's surface, and the vast majority of the seafloor has never been surveyed in detail. Sonar mapping exists for some regions, but comprehensive visual inspection of even mapped areas is impossible with current technology and resources. If artificially created objects can be mistaken for natural rock formations, if ancient technological remains can become encrusted and transformed into stone-like substances over long periods of submersion, then the ocean floors might be hiding countless remnants of civilizations, events, or visitors that predate recorded history. This possibility terrifies not because of what we have found, but because of what we might have missed. How many underwater formations cataloged as natural rocks might actually be degraded technological remains? How many sonar anomalies dismissed as geological features might be artifacts from civilizations that mainstream archaeology does not acknowledge? How complete is our understanding of human history if we have only examined a tiny fraction of the planet's surface and only recently developed the technology capable of exploring deep ocean environments? The Baltic Sea anomaly investigation has stalled in recent years due to funding constraints, controversy, and the difficulty of conducting comprehensive analysis at depth in challenging conditions. OceanX has released photographs, sonar data, and sample analysis results, but the evidence remains disputed. Mainstream scientists dismiss the anomaly as a natural formation, arguing that the geometric features are the result of pareidolia, seeing patterns where none exist, and that the other anomalies can be explained through conventional geology and equipment malfunction. But the questions remain: why do electronics fail near the object? Why does the material show signs of extreme heat exposure in a region with no volcanic activity? How do we explain the circular hole set in a square frame? Why does the trench behind the object look like an impact path rather than a glacial deposit trail? And most fundamentally, why do experienced deep-sea salvage experts, who have seen thousands of underwater formations, insist that this one looks artificial? The truth about the Baltic Sea anomaly may never be fully known without a comprehensive, well-funded scientific investigation that conventional science seems unwilling to conduct. The cost of deepwater archaeology is high, and the political and academic risk of pursuing controversial discoveries is real. The possibility that investigating the anomaly thoroughly might produce evidence that challenges established historical narratives creates institutional resistance to taking the object seriously. But the evidence that exists, limited as it is, points towards something extraordinary. The sonar images show geometric precision. Dive reports describe features that look artificial. Laboratory analysis shows evidence of extreme heat exposure. There has been electromagnetic interference. There is the 300-meter trench and a circular hole set in a square frame. None of these things definitively proves the object is artificial, but together they form a pattern natural geology struggles to explain. The Baltic Sea anomaly sits at the bottom of the sea, 90 meters down in cold darkness, visited occasionally by divers who return with more questions than answers. It continues to interfere with electronics, and it continues to show geometric features that should not exist in natural rock. It resists easy explanation, and it remains one of the most controversial and mysterious underwater discoveries of the modern era. The real terror is not one anomalous object at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The real terror is the possibility that human history is incomplete, that our oceans hide evidence of civilizations or events that predate what we thought we knew about the development of human technology, and that we are standing on a planet whose past is far stranger and more complex than the neat timeline presented in history books. If the Baltic Sea anomaly is artificial, if it is the remains of ancient technology destroyed by catastrophic heat and transformed over millennia into a stone-like substance, then everything we believe about when human civilization began and what capabilities ancient peoples possessed requires reevaluation. If it is something else, non-human, then we are forced to confront the possibility that Earth's history includes visitors or intelligences that conventional science refuses to acknowledge. And if it is natural, if every anomaly can be explained through conventional geology despite the problems and contradictions, then we are left with an even more disturbing question. How many other underwater formations have we dismissed as natural that might actually be artificial? And how much evidence of lost history lies buried under sediment, encrusted with minerals, and mistaken for rocks when it might be the key to understanding chapters of human or planetary history that have been completely forgotten? The Baltic Sea anomaly is terrifying. Not because we know what it is, but because we do not. And the implications of finding out might be even more terrifying than the mystery itself. If we have missed this, if a 60-meter artificial-looking object can sit at the bottom of one of the most surveyed seas in Europe for potentially thousands of years, without being recognized for what it is, what else have we missed in the vast unexplored oceans that cover most of our planet? The truth about the Baltic Sea anomaly remains unsolved. But the questions it raises about our history, our planet, and what might be hidden beneath the waves cannot be ignored. Something is down there, something that looks artificial, that interferes with electronics, that shows evidence of impossible heat exposure, and that experienced divers insist does not match any natural formation they have encountered in decades of underwater exploration. Whether it is ancient human technology, a natural formation with properties we do not understand, or something that challenges our understanding of Earth's history entirely, the Baltic Sea anomaly stands as proof that mysteries remain. Exploration can still yield discoveries that defy explanation. Perhaps the most important question facing humanity is not what is out in space, but what is hidden beneath the oceans that cover most of our planet, waiting to be discovered and to rewrite everything we thought we knew about where we came from and what came before us.